Would you have taken the $300,000 to leave your boyfriend? I know about you and my son, my boyfriend's mom said before I could sit down. Oh, I said nervously. We've been dating for 8 months. She rolled her eyes and slid a check with $100,000 made out to my name. 8 months is long enough for this little experiment, don't you agree? I stared at the check. That money could pay off my student loans. It could cover my dad's medical bills. It could change my life. Love doesn't pay for private schools or get you invited to charity galas. She leaned back in her leather chair. I sit on this company's board. Your little marketing career here could end tomorrow with one phone call to HR about inappropriate conduct. My hands were shaking. You're threatening me? She laughed. No, I'm offering you an opportunity. Take the money, submit your resignation. Tell Enzo you found a better opportunity in another city. Make it clean and everyone wins. You have 48 hours, she said, dismissing me with a wave. After that, I make your life here very difficult. But I didn't need 48 hours. I ripped the check in half right there in her office. Then in quarters, then eighths. The pieces fluttered onto her Persian rug like snow. Her lips curled up into a cheeky grin before bursting into laughter watching me rip up the $100,000 check. Did that make you feel good? I can always write another. I walked out without saying anything. I took a photo of the check with my phone, documenting the day I got threatened and bribed, and stored the ripped pieces in my desk. The next morning, I found a new check on my desk with a yellow sticky note. Last chance. I took a pic of this one too, then shoved it in my drawer. I could have gone to Enzo and showed him the check right away. But I didn't. I threw myself into work. Stayed late every night. Triple-checked every campaign. If she wanted to make my life difficult, I'd be so perfect she'd have no ammunition. Enzo noticed me working harder but thought I was gunning for a promotion. He'd bring me dinner at my desk and kiss me when nobody was looking. You're incredible, you know that? He said one night, watching me prep for a major client presentation. Mom's going to love you when she finally meets you properly. Oh, if only you knew, I thought. After 48 hours passed, my life at work really did end up feeling like a nightmare. My clients started calling with impossible demands. Deadlines got moved up without warning. The sales team suddenly had issues with all my campaigns. I knew it was her, but I couldn't prove it. Then came the restructuring announcement. The marketing department was being reorganized and I was being transferred to the satellite office, 2 hours away, effective immediately. This doesn't make sense, Enzo said at dinner that night. You're the best marketing director we have. Why would they transfer you? I pushed pasta around my plate. Maybe it's a good opportunity. 2 hours away? I'll talk to HR tomorrow. Then, one weekend, Enzo suddenly called to cancel our date. My mom's forcing me to go to the charity gala. Major donors will be there. I can't get out of it. I knew it was another scheme, but it was bigger. I saw the photos online the next morning. Enzo in a tuxedo, next to a stunning woman in a designer gown. Tech heir Enzo and heiress Sienna make stunning couple at charity gala, read the headline. I called in sick and cried until my eyes burned. In the afternoon, his mom somehow got a hold of my number, just to text me saying, "There's a family dinner tomorrow night. We'll be announcing Enzo's engagement to Sienna." I replied, "He doesn't even know her." To which she argued, "He'll learn to love her. Men always do when the woman is beautiful and suitable. Remember to cash in the check before you disappear." I didn't take the money, but I did go to HR with all the checks and proof of bribery and evidence of tampering at work. While I was there, Enzo called me. "You need to come here. Now," he said. He sounded strange. Not angry exactly. Something else. "To your parents' house?" "Enzo, I don't think." "Please," he insisted. I drove to the estate and stepped into a dining room filled with board members and their spouses, and spotted Sienna sitting near Enzo. His mother stood up with a champagne glass in hand. "I want to make an important announcement." Enzo stood up. "I've been dating her for 8 months. I'm proposing tonight." He walked over to me and started pulling out a small box when his mom yelled, "If you propose, you're out of here. No inheritance, no company position, nothing." "Fine," Enzo said. "I'll send my resignation letter tomorrow." His mom gasped. "You're throwing it all away for her? I'll have you both fired then." "Actually," I said, finding my voice, "I just came from a meeting with HR." I pulled out my phone and showed the screenshots. 3 checks totaling $300,000. All bribes to leave your son. All documented and reported. She tried to pay me to disappear. Then she sabotaged my work. Then she tried to illegally transfer me to force my resignation. The room erupted. Board members were talking over each other. His mom tried to explain herself, but it was too late. They called for an emergency vote right there and removed her from the board for violating fiduciary duty and creating a hostile work environment. Enzo was offered the CEO position. He accepted on the condition that I get to keep my position without any retaliation. That's when she absolutely lost it. 2 board members stood up and one made a phone call while his mother's voice got louder and sharper. She pointed at me and called me names I won't repeat here. She told the board they'd regret this decision and threatened legal action against everyone in the room. Security arrived within minutes. 2 men in dark suits approached her calmly and asked her to come with them. She refused, and her voice went up another level. She grabbed her purse and threw it across the room, and it hit the wall near where I was standing. I flinched but didn't move from my spot. The board members watched in silence as security took her by the arms and guided her toward the door. She twisted around to look at Enzo and screamed that he was dead to her. The door closed behind them, and the room went quiet, except for people shifting in their chairs and clearing their throats. Board members started talking in low voices and forming small groups. Nobody looked at me directly. I stood there feeling my hands shake and my legs go weak. One board member came over and told me they'd be in touch through official channels. Then everyone started leaving. Enzo took my hand without saying anything, and we walked through the house and out to the circular driveway where his car was parked. The night air felt cold against my face. We got in the car and he started driving, and neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. My mind kept replaying what just happened. The check screenshots on my phone. Her face when the board voted. The sound of her yelling. I looked over at Enzo and his jaw was tight and his hands gripped the steering wheel hard. I wondered if I'd just ruined everything. Maybe I should have handled it differently. Maybe going to HR was too much. Maybe I should have just taken the money and disappeared like she wanted. My stomach felt sick thinking about Monday when everyone at work would know what happened. Enzo pulled up in front of my apartment building and turned off the car. We sat there in silence for another minute before he finally spoke and said we'd figure it out together. I nodded but didn't feel convinced. We went upstairs to my apartment and I immediately opened my laptop. I forwarded every email with evidence to my personal account. I saved copies of the check photos to 3 different places. I made a folder with everything organized by date. Enzo paced back and forth across my living room while talking on his phone to his lawyer. I heard him explaining what happened at dinner and asking about next steps. The lawyer's voice came through faint but serious sounding. Enzo's face looked tired and stressed. He hung up and sat down on the couch and put his head in his hands. I sat next to him and we talked about what would happen Monday. We went through different scenarios. What if the board changed their minds? What if his mother sued? What if HR fired me anyway? We talked in circles for hours. Around midnight, we tried to sleep, but I just stared at the ceiling. Enzo lay next to me awake too. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his mother's face. Sunday morning, my phone started buzzing before I was fully awake. I grabbed it and saw 12 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. 3 voicemails waited for me. I played the first one, and a woman's voice identified herself as a reporter from a business news site. She asked if I wanted to comment on the boardroom incident at the tech company. The second voicemail was another reporter asking about my relationship with Enzo. The third was someone asking about allegations of bribery. My heart started racing. I showed Enzo and his phone was worse. 23 missed calls. His voicemail box was full. He played a few and they were family members. An aunt demanding to know what happened. A cousin asking if the rumors were true. His mother's lawyer leaving a message about legal representation and urging him to call back immediately. We both turned our phones off and sat on the couch feeling trapped. Monday morning at dawn, my phone buzzed with an email from HR. The subject line said urgent and formal. I opened it with shaking hands. The email requested a detailed written statement about all incidents of bribery and retaliation by end of business today. They'd issued a formal preservation notice for all related documents and communications. The email used words like investigation, an official record, and potential misconduct. Everything felt suddenly real and irreversible. I got dressed in my most professional clothes and drove to the office. My badge still worked when I scanned it at the entrance. I took the elevator to my floor and walked to my desk. Everything was gone. My computer monitor was missing. My files were cleared out. My desk drawers were empty. A yellow sticky note on the desk said to report to room 847 on the 8th floor. The note didn't say why or who left it. I felt my face get hot and my eyes start to burn. I picked up the note and walked to the elevator. The 8th floor was quieter than my usual floor. Room 847 was a small office with a window overlooking the parking lot, a desk and chair and nothing else. Another note said HR would contact me shortly and to wait here. I sat down and felt completely isolated. This felt like punishment even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. An hour later, Audrey Thornton from HR knocked on the door. She was maybe 40 with short dark hair and carried a leather folder. She introduced herself and asked me to follow her to a conference room. The room had no windows and fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly. She sat across from me and opened the folder. She explained this was a formal complaint intake process. She asked me to start from the beginning and tell her everything. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos of the checks. I walked through the timeline. The first meeting in his mother's office. The second check on my desk. The impossible deadlines that started after I refused the money. The sudden transfer order to the satellite office. The charity gala set up with Sienna. Audrey took notes the whole time. She asked specific questions about dates and times and who else was present. She asked if I had any witnesses or documentation. I showed her the emails about the transfer and the text messages from his mother. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, I felt both relieved that someone was listening and exposed like I'd revealed too much. Audrey said she'd be in touch and reminded me not to discuss the investigation with co-workers. Meanwhile, board counsel visited Enzo in his temporary office on the executive floor. I found out later that they clarified the CEO offer was interim only. He'd need to go through full vetting and background checks. They flagged potential conflict of interest issues with me still employed at the company. They asked detailed questions about our relationship timeline and whether there had been any preferential treatment. Enzo's face went pale as he realized how complicated this was going to be. Walking through the hallways that week, I felt eyes on me constantly. Whispers followed me. Some colleagues I'd worked with for months suddenly avoided eye contact. Others shot me curious looks or hostile stares. I heard my name mentioned in conversations that stopped when I got close. Someone left a printed article about the boardroom incident on the printer near my temporary office. I became the office scandal whether I wanted that role or not. By Wednesday, I was officially excluded from team meetings. An email came from my team lead saying I was in a temporary review period and wouldn't be included in project discussions. My active campaigns were reassigned to other people without explanation. Nobody asked for my input or transition notes. I sat in my borrowed office on the 8th floor feeling completely useless. I checked my email obsessively, but nothing came. I tried to work on general research but had no assignments. I wondered if speaking up had been worth becoming a corporate pariah. Thursday morning brought an email from HR scheduling a formal relationship disclosure meeting for me and Enzo that afternoon. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking slightly as I realized we'd have to sit there together and answer questions about us like we were being interrogated. The conference room felt sterile and cold when I arrived, and Enzo was already sitting on one side of the table while I took a chair on the opposite side, 3 feet of polished wood between us like a barrier. Audrey walked in with another HR rep I didn't recognize, both carrying thick folders and legal pads. They asked when we first met, how the relationship started, whether anyone at work knew before now. I answered each question carefully, watching my words, hyper-aware of how everything sounded. They wanted to know if Enzo had ever given me preferential treatment on projects or promotions. They asked if I'd ever received benefits or opportunities because of our relationship. Enzo's jaw was tight as he explained that we'd kept things completely separate, that my work performance had nothing to do with us dating. The questions kept coming for over an hour, clinical and uncomfortable, reducing 8 months of genuine connection to a potential liability that needed to be managed and documented. When we finally left, we walked to our cars separately without speaking, and I felt like the relationship itself had been put on trial and found guilty of something we couldn't quite name. Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Sienna asking if I could meet for coffee somewhere off campus. I stared at the message for a full minute, suspicious of what she wanted but also curious why she'd reach out. We met at a small place 2 blocks from the office, and she was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived, looking nervous and nothing like the confident heiress from the gala photos. She started talking before I even sat down, apologizing for being used as a prop in his mother's scheme. She explained that his mother had promised her family major donor access to influential networks in exchange for playing the perfect match at public events. She said she felt terrible watching the whole thing unfold at the family dinner, realizing she'd been part of something manipulative and cruel. I listened, not sure what to say, as she admitted she'd never even wanted to date Enzo, and had only agreed because her parents pushed her to make the right connections. She pulled out her phone and showed me the text chain with his mother, proving everything she was saying, and I realized she was trying to make amends by giving me evidence I might need. We talked for another 20 minutes about family pressure and expectations, and the weight of other people's ambitions, and by the end I felt like we'd formed an unlikely alliance built on both being caught in the same woman's manipulation. That evening I was scrolling through my phone when I saw a tech industry blog had published a piece titled, "Boardroom Drama Rocks Unnamed Tech Company." The article was deliberately vague, not naming anyone specifically, but every detail pointed directly at us. It talked about family dynasties and workplace romances and governance failures and emergency board votes. I read through it twice, my stomach twisting, then made the mistake of opening the comments section. Hundreds of people were speculating about which company it was, throwing out names and theories. Someone had figured it out and posted screenshots from the charity gala with Enzo and Sienna. The comments about me were brutal and dismissive, calling me the office girlfriend, like that was my entire identity. People questioned whether I'd slept my way into my position. Others made jokes about gold diggers and social climbers. Not one comment mentioned my actual work, or the campaigns I'd built, or the years I'd spent earning my role. My professional accomplishments had become completely invisible, erased by a narrative that reduced me to someone's girlfriend who caused problems. I closed my phone and sat in the dark of my apartment, feeling exposed and humiliated by strangers who knew nothing about me, but felt entitled to judge everything. Friday morning, I had a consultation scheduled with Mercedes Thornton, an employment lawyer that a former colleague had recommended. Her office was downtown in a building with marble floors and expensive art, and she met me in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I laid out everything for her, showing the photos of the checks, the timeline of retaliation, the transfer order, the threatening texts. She took notes while I talked, asking specific questions about dates and documentation, and who had witnessed what. When I finished, she leaned back and confirmed that I had strong retaliation claims based on the evidence. She explained my rights under employment law, outlined possible outcomes ranging from settlements to litigation, and gave me a framework for protecting myself as this process continued to unfold. She talked about documentation requirements and legal timelines and the importance of routing everything through proper channels. Having someone knowledgeable validate that what happened to me was wrong, that I had legal standing and options, made me feel less powerless than I had in weeks. She couldn't promise specific results, but she gave me tools and knowledge, which felt like the first real weapon I'd had in this fight. That evening, I got home to find a thick envelope from my dad's hospital in the mailbox. I opened it standing in my kitchen and pulled out a bill for $8,000 in uncovered treatment costs. The number stared back at me, black and bold, representing months of my salary and stress I couldn't afford. I sat down at my kitchen table and thought about those checks from his mother, how that money could have covered this bill 3 times over. I thought about how easy it would have been to just take it and disappear and solve all my immediate financial problems. Part of me still wanted to, even now. even after everything. But I'd come too far to back down. Invested too much in standing up for myself to fold now over money. I put the bill in my drawer with all the other paperwork from this mess and tried not to calculate how many months it would take to pay it off. Enzo called late Friday night asking me to lay low publicly while he went through board vetting the following week. His voice was tired and strained as he explained that the board was watching everything, that any public drama or attention could hurt his chances at the permanent CEO position. I understood the logic, could see why he needed things quiet and controlled, but I resented being asked to hide like I was the problem. We argued for the first time in our relationship, really argued, about whose career and reputation mattered more. He said he was trying to protect both of us by keeping things low-key. I said I was tired of being invisible and managed and treated like a liability instead of a person. He got defensive about the pressure he was under. I got angry about being asked to shrink myself to make his life easier. We both said things we didn't quite mean, frustrated and scared and taking it out on each other because we couldn't take it out on anyone else. The call ended badly, both of us upset, neither of us apologizing. Monday morning, Audrey interviewed Gabriela Castillo, a senior colleague who'd worked with me on several of the campaigns that got sabotaged. I found out later that Gabriela confirmed everything to HR, telling them that my deadlines had been moved without normal approval processes. She explained that the client demands on my accounts had been unusually aggressive compared to other projects running at the same time. She provided specific examples of emails where instructions changed suddenly and requirements escalated without explanation. She told them the whole thing had seemed off to her even before she knew about the bribery and retaliation. Having a credible witness corroborate my experience meant HR couldn't dismiss my claims as personal drama or misunderstanding. Gabriela's testimony added weight and legitimacy to everything I'd reported, turning my word against his mother's into documented pattern backed by multiple sources. Tuesday morning, I opened my email to find an anonymous message with the subject line, "Should have taken the money." The body of the email contained veiled threats about making my life difficult, implying that worse things were coming if I didn't back down. My hands were shaking as I read it, recognizing the same tone and phrasing his mother had used in her texts. I forwarded it immediately to Audrey with a note explaining the threatening nature of the content. She responded within an hour saying she was escalating to legal and triggering additional anti-retaliation protections. The company's security team started tracing the email origin while legal documented it as evidence of ongoing harassment. The threat backfired, giving me more ammunition and proving that the retaliation hadn't stopped just because his mother lost her board seat. By Wednesday afternoon, HR officially rescinded my satellite office transfer and reassigned me to a different product line to reduce conflicts of interest. The new role was in brand strategy. Not my original marketing director position, but not exile either. It came with similar pay and responsibilities, just reporting through a different chain that didn't intersect with Enzo's authority. I read the reassignment letter 3 times, analyzing every word, trying to decide if this was a win or just a different kind of punishment. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was better than being shipped 2 hours away or frozen out completely. I accepted it as a small win, proof that speaking up had produced at least some positive result, even if it wasn't full vindication. Thursday brought a letter from his mother's attorney threatening a defamation lawsuit for false and damaging statements made in a semi-public forum. The legal language was dense and intimidating, claiming I'd harmed her reputation and professional standing with unsubstantiated allegations. Company counsel called me that afternoon and advised me to make no public statements about anything and route all communication through legal channels. They assured me the company would provide legal support since the statements were made during an internal investigation, but the letter still scared me. I'd never been threatened with a lawsuit before, never had to think about depositions and court proceedings and legal fees. I forwarded everything to Mercedes, who reviewed it and told me not to worry, that it was a standard intimidation tactic, and the claims had no merit given my documented evidence. But knowing something is a tactic doesn't make it feel less threatening when you're the target. Friday afternoon arrived with an email from the board chair requesting a private meeting in his office at 3. I spent my lunch hour organizing every piece of evidence into a clean timeline with photos, emails, and witness statements attached. The meeting felt like a test I couldn't afford to fail. Jason Thornton's office was on the executive floor, all dark wood and leather furniture that smelled like money and power. He gestured to a chair across from his massive desk and pulled out a yellow legal pad. He asked me to walk through everything from the beginning, and his pen moved steadily across the paper as I talked. I explained the first check, the second check, the third check, the sudden impossible deadlines, the transfer order that came out of nowhere. He asked specific questions about dates and times and who witnessed what. His face stayed neutral the whole time, giving me no clue whether he believed me or thought I was making trouble. After 40 minutes, he set down his pen and looked at me directly. He thanked me for my thoroughness and professionalism, then said the board would review everything carefully. It wasn't a promise or a victory, but it was the first time someone with real power had actually listened to the whole story without interrupting or dismissing it. I walked back to my temporary office feeling like maybe the documentation mattered after all. Saturday morning, I was reviewing budget reports when I noticed a decision had come down from the executive level, cutting my new team's allocation by 15%. The cut came from Enzo's office. I called him immediately, trying to keep my voice steady, asking what happened. He explained it calmly, walking through the financial rationale and company priorities. The decision made sense for the business, but it hurt my team directly. We argued for 20 minutes about whether he should have warned me or handled it differently. He said he couldn't give me special treatment just because we were dating, which I understood logically, but it still felt like a betrayal. We ended the call without really resolving anything, both frustrated and tired. Sunday night we met at his apartment and had the conversation we'd been avoiding. The scrutiny was too intense right now. Any public relationship milestone would be used against us by his mother or the media, or people who wanted to see us fail. We agreed to keep everything private until the investigation's finished, and the shareholder meeting concluded. No announcements, no social media posts, no public appearances together. It felt like moving backward after everything we'd been through, but we both knew the alternative was worse. Monday morning, I was scrolling through my phone over coffee when I saw Sienna's post. She announced she was stepping back from any association with the family's business interests to focus on her own philanthropic work. The statement was carefully worded and professional. 10 minutes later, she texted me privately with just 2 words. The unexpected decency from someone who could have stayed silent or sided with his mother meant more than I expected. By noon, the company issued its own statement announcing a comprehensive culture and policy review in response to recent governance concerns. The PR language was deliberately vague, mentioning institutional accountability and workplace standards without naming anyone specifically. I watched the online commentary roll in. Some people praising the company for taking action, while others called it an overreaction to a personal dispute between a mother and son's girlfriend. The split opinions made it clear this wasn't going to be simple or clean. Tuesday afternoon, Audrey forwarded me links to posts appearing on industry forums and review sites. Anonymous accounts were calling me a gold digger who seduced the boss's son for career advancement. The post questioned my qualifications and suggested I'd slept my way into every position I'd ever held. I felt sick reading them, but forced myself to document everything with screenshots. The company's digital forensics team started tracing IP addresses, while I tried not to refresh the pages obsessively to see what new lies were being posted. Wednesday morning, my dad called saying he felt worse than usual and asking if I could come home. I submitted a personal day request and drove the 2 hours to sit with him through his treatment. He looked smaller in the hospital chair with the IV in his arm. I held his hand and tried to focus on being present, but my mind kept drifting back to work, and Enzo and the anonymous post destroying my reputation. I felt pulled in too many directions, failing at everything because I couldn't give anything my full attention. The weight of juggling the lawsuit threat and the investigation and my dad's health and my relationship and my career became crushing in a way I hadn't let myself acknowledge before. Thursday morning, Mercedes called with news about a retention package she'd negotiated on my behalf. The company was offering anti-retaliation protections in writing, a modest salary increase, and a professional development budget for training and conferences. It wasn't a promotion, but it was a clear signal they wanted to keep me. She walked through every clause carefully, making sure I understood what was protected and what wasn't. I signed the paperwork that afternoon, feeling like I'd won something small but meaningful. Friday brought a new complication when Enzo forwarded me a letter his mother's lawyer had sent to minority shareholders. She was attempting to rally support to challenge the board's emergency vote at an upcoming special meeting. The legal language questioned the procedures used to remove her and demanded a full review of the decision. Her lawyer argued the vote was rushed and improper, lacking the required notice and deliberation. Enzo said the company counsel was preparing defensive materials, but the uncertainty made everyone nervous about what would happen at the shareholder meeting. Monday morning, my new team lead called me into her office with an urgent request. The senior director scheduled to present to our biggest client had food poisoning and couldn't travel. She needed someone to step in and deliver the quarterly strategy review in 3 days. I knew this was a test. Everyone was watching to see if I could handle pressure after everything that happened. I spent the next 72 hours living in conference rooms in my apartment, rehearsing every slide until I could recite the pitch in my sleep. I rewrote sections that felt weak, added data visualizations to strengthen weak points, and practiced my delivery in front of my bathroom mirror at 2 in the morning. Enzo texted asking if I wanted dinner, but I sent back a quick no and kept working. My hands shook every time I thought about standing in front of the client, knowing my professional reputation was hanging by a thread. Wednesday afternoon, I walked into the client's downtown office building carrying my laptop and a backup hard drive in case the technology failed. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows and 12 people sitting around an oval table. I set up my materials, connected to their display system, and started talking. The first 5 minutes felt rough as I found my rhythm, but then something clicked. I answered their questions with specific examples, addressed concerns before they fully formed, and connected our strategy to their business goals in ways that made their marketing VP lean forward and take notes. By the time I finished the presentation, the client's CEO was nodding and their CFO was already drafting contract language on his tablet. They signed a 3-year extension worth twice the original contract value. My team lead actually smiled at me in front of the whole group and said I'd delivered the strongest pitch she'd seen all year. Walking out of that building, I felt like a real professional again, instead of just the woman from the boardroom scandal. Thursday morning, Audrey sent me an email marked confidential with preliminary investigation findings attached. I opened the PDF in my locked office and read through 8 pages of documented evidence. HR had interviewed 12 witnesses, reviewed hundreds of emails, and traced the timeline of every deadline change and project reassignment. The report confirmed that my workload increased by 40% in the 2 weeks after I rejected the first bribe. It showed that normal approval processes were bypassed for my transfer order. It documented witness statements from colleagues who saw the pattern of impossible demands. Audrey's summary recommended formal sanctions against everyone involved in the retaliation scheme, but she included a warning at the bottom that the process wasn't finished, and I should expect pushback from legal counsel. I saved 3 copies of the report to different drives and felt something close to relief, knowing I hadn't imagined the coordination working against me. That evening, Enzo came over to my apartment and we sat on my couch having the conversation we'd been avoiding for weeks. He wanted to know where we stood and what came next. I told him I wanted a future with him, but couldn't make big announcements while everything was under review. He understood the logic, but I could see the disappointment in his face when he realized we were putting our lives on hold for corporate politics. We agreed not to get engaged or make any public relationship milestones until the investigations closed and his vetting finished. It was mature and responsible, but also sad, like we were letting other people's rules control our timeline. He held my hand and promised this was temporary, but temporary felt like it could stretch on forever when neither of us knew what the board would ultimately decide. Friday brought a company-wide email announcing that the shareholders' special meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Company counsel was preparing defensive materials about proper governance procedures and the legal basis for the emergency vote. The uncertainty made everyone tense. People stopped talking when I walked into meetings. Colleagues chose their words carefully, like they were worried about being quoted later. The whole office felt like everyone was walking on ice, testing each step before putting their weight down. I focused on my work and tried not to think about what would happen if the shareholders overturned the board's decision. The following Tuesday, I was digging through old emails looking for a campaign timeline when I found something that didn't make sense. My transfer order to the satellite office had been personally authorized by Troy Castillo, a VP in operations. That was weird because operations never handled marketing transfers. I pulled up the org chart and confirmed that Troy had no legitimate reason to be involved in that decision. I checked the normal approval chain and found that 3 required signatures were missing. Someone had pushed my transfer through outside standard procedures, and Troy's name was on the authorization. I documented everything with screenshots, wrote a detailed explanation of why the timing and process were irregular, and sent it all to Audrey with a note asking her to investigate this specific approval. 2 days later, Troy resigned. The announcement came through a terse company email saying he was pursuing other opportunities effective immediately. No farewell party, no transition period, just gone. An hour later, an internal memo from HR confirmed that Troy had violated several company policies during his tenure. The memo didn't name me specifically, but the timing was obvious. My complaint had triggered an investigation that found enough problems to force a resignation. Other colleagues started coming forward with their own stories about Troy bending rules and bypassing procedures. It felt like validation that I wasn't imagining things or overreacting. The retaliation had been real and coordinated, and now there was documented proof that couldn't be dismissed. That weekend, Enzo asked me to consider transferring to a different division temporarily to reduce the appearance of conflicts during his vetting process. I pushed back hard. I'd already been forced into one transfer I didn't want. I wasn't going to accept another one just because it looked better on paper. We spent 3 hours negotiating an alternative approach. Instead of moving me, we'd create clear documentation of my qualifications and establish a promotion timeline that proved any career advancement was merit-based, not favoritism. We'd have everything reviewed by third-party consultants who could verify that my performance justified my position. Enzo agreed to the plan and promised to present it to the board as a better solution than shuffling me around to make other people comfortable. The next week, we met with HR and legal to submit a detailed recusal and disclosure plan. The document spelled out exactly how we'd handle situations where our relationship could create conflicts of interest. Enzo would abstain from any decisions affecting my division. I would report to someone outside his direct authority. We'd maintain separate professional networks and avoid any appearance of preferential treatment. A third-party compliance monitor would review our adherence quarterly and report findings to the board. HR approved the plan with the quarterly oversight reviews, which felt like structure rather than punishment. It was formal and bureaucratic, but at least it gave us a framework for moving forward, instead of just hiding and hoping nobody noticed. Thursday afternoon, Sienna texted asking if we could talk privately. I met her at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office where nobody from work would see us. She leaned across the table and warned me that Enzo's mother was preparing a media hit piece through a friendly journalist at a business publication. The story would paint me as a manipulative outsider who seduced her son for money and career advancement. Sienna had heard about it through her family's donor network and wanted me to know what was coming. I thanked her and immediately called the company's PR team. They started preparing counter-narratives and legal responses within the hour. The PR director asked me for a timeline of events and copies of all the documentation, so they could get ahead of the story. By evening, we had talking points drafted and a lawyer reviewing options for legal action if the article contained provable lies. The article never ran. Either the PR team's legal threats worked, or his mother realized she'd lose more credibility by attacking me publicly. But the shareholders' meeting still loomed 3 weeks away, and I wasn't allowed anywhere near it. Company policy kept me out of governance decisions now that I was part of an active HR case. So I sat at my desk that Tuesday morning refreshing my phone while Enzo texted me updates from inside the boardroom. The first message came at 9:15 saying the meeting started and his mother's lawyer was challenging the emergency vote procedures. Then nothing for 40 minutes. My coffee went cold while I stared at the screen. Finally, another text arrived saying the board chair shut down the procedural challenges and called for the confirmation vote. 10 more minutes of silence. Then the result came through in 3 words. Vote passed. Interim confirmed. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Another message followed explaining the vote included enhanced oversight provisions and quarterly reviews of his performance. His mother kept her shares but lost all advisory status and board access. She was officially just another shareholder now with no operational power. I saved the texts as documentation and forwarded them to Mercedes, then went back to pretending to work on a campaign brief I couldn't focus on. The company announced the culture initiatives 2 days later, through an all-hands email that went out at 8 in the morning. Mandatory ethics training for all employees starting next month. Revised reporting procedures for workplace concerns. An independent ombudsman position to handle complaints outside normal HR channels. The email listed 5 other changes, including quarterly culture surveys and updated conflict of interest policies. My name appeared nowhere in any of it. The announcement talked about commitment to accountability and building trust, but never mentioned what actually triggered these changes. I understood why they kept me anonymous. Legal probably advised against naming anyone involved in active cases, but sitting at my desk reading about reforms I helped create while being completely invisible in the narrative felt strange. Colleagues forwarded the email around with comments about finally taking workplace issues seriously. Nobody connected it to me. Nobody knew I was the reason any of this existed. I closed my laptop and took a long lunch break walking around the block trying to figure out if invisibility was protection or erasure. Audrey scheduled a meeting for Friday afternoon to deliver the final findings. I sat across from her in the same conference room where this whole process started, and she slid a folder across the table. The report confirmed that retaliation occurred based on documented timeline changes, witness statements, and email evidence showing coordination between executives. She recommended sanctions for everyone involved in the scheme, but couldn't share specific details about what happened to them due to privacy rules. What she could tell me was that the findings supported my account completely, and consequences were being implemented according to company policy. She asked if I had any questions. I asked if this meant it was really over. She said the investigation was closed, but the compliance monitoring would continue company-wide to prevent similar situations. Then she thanked me for my cooperation, and walked me through the final paperwork that officially closed my case file. I signed everything and left, feeling like I'd won something important, but couldn't quite celebrate it. Monday morning brought an email from the vice president of marketing requesting a meeting to discuss my career path. I showed up at her office expecting another transfer announcement, or maybe a suggestion that I'd be happier somewhere else. Instead, she offered me a lateral to upward move into brand strategy, with clear reporting lines that didn't intersect with Enzo's authority. The role came with detailed documentation showing my qualifications, performance reviews, and project outcomes that justified the position based purely on merit. She explained they'd brought in outside consultants to review the promotion, to ensure no appearance of favoritism or conflict of interest. Everything was documented and defensible if anyone questioned whether I earned it. I asked about the team structure and responsibilities. She walked me through reporting chains and showed me the organizational chart proving I'd be 3 levels removed from any decisions Enzo made. It wasn't my dream role, but it was solid work with real responsibility and protection from future interference. I accepted it as the best realistic outcome given everything that happened. Legal counsel finalized the settlement agreement the following week. The document included non-disparagement and non-retaliation clauses protecting me from future interference by anyone involved in the case. I couldn't talk publicly about the details, but the company couldn't retaliate or allow others to retaliate either. Mercedes reviewed every page carefully during a video call and negotiated carve-outs allowing me to speak truthfully if legally required in future proceedings. She made sure I wasn't completely silenced, just protected from casual disclosure that could hurt me professionally. The settlement also included a modest financial component covering my legal fees and some compensation for the stress and career disruption. It wasn't life-changing money, but it acknowledged that what happened to me was wrong and cost me something. I signed the final version and sent it back through Mercedes feeling like I'd gotten as much protection as the system could offer. A colleague I barely knew stopped by my desk the next afternoon. She worked in product development and we'd maybe exchanged 10 words total in the past year. She stood there awkwardly for a moment before saying she was glad I spoke up and that my courage helped other people feel safer reporting problems. She didn't elaborate on what problems or who reported them, just said thank you and walked away before I could respond. The broader social chill from other coworkers remained obvious in how they avoided me in the break room and kept conversations surface level. But that one moment of solidarity meant more than I expected. Someone noticed. Someone appreciated what it cost me to push back against power. I went back to work feeling slightly less alone. My dad called that evening with news that his treatment plan was stabilizing and showing positive results. Better yet, a patient advocate at the hospital had helped restructure the billing to reduce immediate pressure. It wasn't forgiveness of the debt, but it was manageable payments spread over time instead of crushing demands for immediate payment. He sounded lighter than he had in months, joking about how my stubbornness must be genetic since we both refused to take the easy way out. I laughed and felt something tight in my chest finally loosen. The medical bills still existed, but they weren't drowning us anymore. I could breathe about the financial stress for the first time since this whole situation started. The conference invitation arrived via email 2 weeks later. A major industry event wanted me to speak on a panel about compliance and workplace culture. The email praised my courage and leadership in driving positive change. I stared at it for a long time before forwarding it to Mercedes for advice. She called me within an hour and we talked through the implications. Speaking publicly would raise my profile but also make me the face of corporate drama instead of just a professional doing her job. It could help other people, but it could also define my entire career as the woman who fought her boyfriend's mother. After discussing it thoroughly, I declined politely, choosing to rebuild through quiet competence rather than becoming a public symbol. The conference organizer sent a gracious response saying they understood and hoped I'd reconsider in the future. Enzo's mother found me in the parking garage one Thursday evening as I was walking to my car. She appeared from behind a concrete pillar and blocked my path. Her voice shook with rage as she blamed me for destroying her family legacy and turning her son against her. She said I was a manipulative opportunist who seduced Enzo for money and status. She called me names I won't repeat and threatened to make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. I kept my phone recording in my pocket the entire time, staying calm and responding only to tell her to step back and let me pass. She finally moved after 3 minutes of verbal assault. I got in my car with shaking hands and drove straight to the security office where I filed a report and provided the audio recording. Security forwarded everything to HR and legal immediately. By morning, there was a formal trespass warning issued and security protocols updated to prevent her from accessing company property. Enzo began the hard work of restructuring the company and proving himself as a leader, which meant 14-hour days and weekend strategy sessions. We went from seeing each other most evenings to maybe twice a week for quick dinners where he was exhausted and distracted. He'd apologize for being absent, but then his phone would buzz with another crisis requiring immediate attention. We communicated better than before about expectations and boundaries, but the loneliness was real. I'd sit in my apartment at night working on my own projects while he was still at the office managing his. We texted throughout the day, and he always called before bed, but it wasn't the same as actually being together. I reminded myself that distance now might mean stability later. He was building something sustainable, and I was rebuilding my career on solid ground. The foundation we created through crisis felt strong enough to handle temporary separation. At least that's what I told myself on the nights when I really missed him. A few weeks later, I saw Sienna's name in a tech industry newsletter announcing a new education access program for underprivileged students. The initiative had its own website and board of advisors with no mention of her family's traditional charity networks. She didn't issue any statements about the boardroom drama or distance herself publicly from what happened. She just built something completely separate and moved forward. I texted her a simple congratulations, and she responded with a thumbs-up emoji. It felt like everyone was finding their own way to heal and rebuild without making it a big production. The defamation claim moved forward faster than I expected. Mercedes scheduled me for a deposition at her law firm downtown on a Tuesday morning. I sat in a conference room with wood paneling and leather chairs, while his mother's lawyer asked questions designed to make me look calculating and opportunistic. He wanted to know when I first learned about the family's wealth, whether I researched their net worth before dating, if I deliberately positioned myself to meet someone from that social class. Mercedes coached me through staying calm and answering only what was asked without volunteering extra information. The hostile tone wore me down after 2 hours of questioning about my relationship timeline, career ambitions, and financial situation. I kept my answers short and factual, while the lawyer tried to paint me as someone who seduced her way into money and status. When we finally finished, Mercedes walked me to my car and told me I did well holding steady under pressure. The process felt draining in a way that had nothing to do with truth or justice and everything to do with endurance. Back at work, my new team launched a major campaign for a financial services client that I'd been developing for months. The results came in better than projected, with measurable increases in customer engagement and positive feedback in the client's quarterly review. My team lead documented the success in performance reviews and brought it up in the next department meeting as an example of effective strategy execution. Colleagues who'd been distant started acknowledging my work again in small ways, nodding in hallways or including me in project discussions. The professional reputation I'd been rebuilding through quiet competence was finally showing concrete results. Nobody mentioned the drama or asked about the investigation. They just responded to the work itself, which felt like the cleanest possible validation. I drove to my dad's place that Friday evening and stayed through the weekend. Saturday afternoon, sitting on his back porch with coffee, I finally told him everything. The 3 checks totaling $300,000. The parking garage confrontation. The depositions and legal threats. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring at his coffee mug. Then he said he was proud I didn't compromise my integrity, even when taking the money would have solved both our problems. We sat together with that complexity hanging between us, the knowledge that doing the right thing had costs we were both still paying. He squeezed my hand and told me he'd rather struggle with medical bills than watch me lose myself for cash. I cried a little, and he did too, and we didn't try to make it okay, or pretend the choice was easy. Monday brought a board meeting where budget allocations for next quarter were being finalized. My division's request for additional marketing spend was on the agenda. I wasn't in the room but heard about it later from my team lead. When the vote came up, Enzo abstained completely, citing the conflict protocols we'd established with HR. He didn't argue for or against the request, just removed himself from the decision entirely. Other executives noticed, and one of them apparently commented that his adherence to governance rules showed strong ethical leadership. The board approved our budget request on its merits without his input. My team lead seemed impressed that Enzo followed the protocols even when it meant giving up influence over decisions that affected me. It helped his credibility as someone who takes conflict management seriously instead of just paying lip service to corporate policies. Thursday afternoon, Audrey called me into her office and officially closed my case file. She showed me documentation that all recommended actions had been completed, including policy updates, mandatory training for executives, and revised reporting procedures. The company appointed a compliance monitor to track similar issues company-wide and ensure the new systems were actually being used. Audrey told me my case created precedent for how the organization handles executive wrongdoing and retaliation claims. I wasn't named in any public communications, but she made sure I understood that my willingness to document everything and push through the process had resulted in meaningful institutional change. The closure felt anticlimactic after months of stress, but also solid. The paper trail was complete and the systems were in place. That weekend, Enzo and I drove to a small cabin 2 hours north with no internet and terrible cell reception. We'd agreed beforehand not to discuss work or family drama or any of the ongoing legal situations. Friday night, we cooked dinner together, and Saturday, we hiked through woods that smelled like pine and damp earth. We didn't talk about proposals or timelines or what our future looked like. We just existed together in the present moment, remembering why we chose each other in the first place. Sunday morning, we sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching fog lift off the lake. The quiet felt healing in a way that had nothing to do with solving problems and everything to do with just being together without pressure or performance. Monday morning, I walked into the office and dove straight into project work. The scars from everything remained visible in the careful way some colleagues interacted with me and the professional distance others maintained. But I had my support systems in place and clear boundaries established. I knew which battles to fight and which situations to document. The normalcy felt fragile but real, like I was rebuilding something sustainable rather than just surviving day to day. A junior employee named Sarah from the operations team asked if she could grab coffee and talk through some workplace challenges she was facing. We met at the cafe downstairs, and she told me about a manager who was taking credit for her work and making subtle threats when she tried to push back. I shared lessons about documentation, knowing your rights, and building alliances with people who have institutional credibility. I walked her through how to create paper trails and when to escalate versus when to handle things directly. Helping someone else navigate similar dynamics felt like turning my experience into something useful beyond just surviving it. She thanked me and said she felt less alone knowing someone else had faced retaliation and come through it. 3 months later, the compliance monitor issued their first quarterly report to the board. The document noted improved reporting culture across departments and reduced fear of retaliation when employees raised concerns. Anonymous survey data showed increased trust in HR processes and willingness to use formal complaint channels. I wasn't named anywhere in the report, but I knew my case was the catalyst that forced the company to take these issues seriously. Seeing systemic change emerge from personal pain felt meaningful in a way I hadn't expected. The individual battle I'd fought had created openings for other people to speak up and expect accountability. That ripple effect mattered more than any personal vindication. 2 weeks later, the board announced Enzo's permanent appointment as CEO after he completed the full vetting process and led the company through major restructuring without any conflicts. His mother kept her shares but had zero operational control, which meant she could complain at shareholder meetings but couldn't interfere with daily decisions. The tension remained visible whenever quarterly reports went out, but the boundaries were clear and enforceable now. I watched him handle the pressure of proving himself while managing his mother's ongoing resentment, and he did it without asking me to hide or compromise my position. The HR director called me into her office on a Friday afternoon to discuss a new senior brand strategist role with my own team reporting to me. She walked me through the transparent selection process, showed me the documented justification based on my campaign results and client retention numbers, and explained that 3 other candidates were considered through the same criteria. The promotion felt earned rather than given, like I'd actually proved my value through work instead of surviving drama. I stopped questioning whether I belonged there and started focusing on building something meaningful with my new team. My dad called that same week with news that his latest scans showed positive results and his treatment protocol was complete. The medical bills still added up to a scary number, but the payment plan made it manageable instead of crushing, and he joked that my stubbornness about refusing bribe money must have come straight from his side of the family. We laughed about it, but I could hear the relief in his voice knowing the worst was behind him. Enzo and I celebrated our 1-year anniversary on a quiet Tuesday night at home with takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat on the couch talking about everything we'd survived together, from his mother's bribes to boardroom votes to HR investigations to his vetting process. Neither of us brought up engagement rings or wedding timelines or future plans that felt too big to discuss yet. We just acknowledged that we'd built something real through crisis instead of despite it, something that felt solid enough to last because we'd already tested it under the worst possible conditions. He fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, and I stayed awake thinking about how different this moment felt from that first check on the Persian rug, how choosing the hard path had led somewhere worth being. Well, that's the thrilling conclusion to an incredibly average story. If you're still here, congratulations, you've got persistence and questionable taste. You might as well subscribe now because you've already proven your loyalty. See you in the next mess.